Hey y'all. I want to talk today about budgeting for AEO and SEO. And there are a lot of things I'm going to cover today, but I kind of want this to be an exploration. So if you're watching this a little bit later, you're going to see me build a spreadsheet and work through some things. If you have comments, you want to send them to me on LinkedIn or whatever, that's great. But yeah, I want to talk about how to budget for these things and some approaches that we see and build a little spreadsheet together to think about this. So one point I want to make before we really get started is there's this really great post by Dave Kellogg about this idea of marketing being more like a popcorn machine than a gumball machine. I don't think he uses the latter phrase. We sometimes run into people we talk to who treat marketing like a gumball machine. And it's basically like, I should be able to put a quarter in and I'm going to get a lead out or $1 a pipeline out. And eventually you can get there. You can get closer to that direction. You can model things. But generally speaking, it doesn't work that way on the micro level in marketing. So when we're talking about specific channels like paid and SEO and all this, all these individual parts of marketing, it's much harder to say, hey, I'm going to put X in and get Y out. Of course, you should ask for results and accountability and all of that stuff that you need to know if something is working. Of course, you want to be able to have that conversation, but it isn't a situation where you're putting in a quarter, you're getting a gumball out. It's more like we're spending money on this and things are going to happen, not randomly, but perhaps unrandomly in the aggregate. And so we need to make sure that the overall marketing system is healthy. And hopefully for you, if you're looking at this, the conversation you're not having with a CEO is, hey, I want to hear about the AEO SEO budget. Hopefully what you're hearing is, I want to hear about the marketing budget. And this is useful for you as a marketing leader because we're going to talk about how to budget within your team and allocate between channels. So that's just point number one I want to say. The purpose of this and who this is really targeted to is marketing leaders who are thinking about how to tweak the individual parts of their system rather than, hey, we have to have a conversation with the CEO. Okay. So, and it's a great post and you should check it out. The popcorn marketing is a popcorn machine. So let's start. There are a few things I'm going to cover today. So I'm going to talk about what you really need to have sort of AEO and SEO work as a channel. And I have a few different points there. And then I'm going to move very quickly over to actually building a spreadsheet and talking through that a little bit. So I think the first question before we start budgeting for this is, what does AEO, LLM search, and frankly, SEO even require these days? And there are a few different categories of stuff that we see. So one of them is a way of doing analytics on whether it's working or not. Now, there are free tools for that, like Search Console. There are paid tools for that, like SEMrush or Profound, or lots and lots of other tools out there that help you measure. There are also tools that help you create content, although the quality of content you'll get out will vary depending on how much investment you put into those tools. So there's an analytics piece. There's also potentially a workflow piece, and tools like N8N or AirOps or Gumloop or Profound will also do this, where you're like generating content or figuring out how to generate that. And then you almost certainly will need some kind of writing budget, or at least some kind of way of getting things in front of a writing team, even if that's not coming. So when we talk about AEO, LLM search, and SEO and how to budget for it, we're really talking about the program management, analytics tools, and then ultimately, like, what's the system for us to produce the content and get that up on the site. There could be a fourth category, which is web dev. In our experience, the clients we work with tend not to need a ton of that, but some people will suggest that you need to invest a lot there. We don't usually find that it's necessary, but that's another thing that you could have. Okay. So thinking about that core thing, you're really budgeting within that program all of those individual pieces. And then one other thing I want to answer real quick is, like, can you fold LLM visibility or AEO or GEO into the SEO budget? And from my perspective, the answer to that is categorically yes. There's lots of things we can get into to talk about this in detail, but if you're thinking about what actually gets you LLM visibility, it tends to be a lot of overlap with what gets you visibility in search. It's not 100% overlap, but you can definitely put this in a very similar line item where you're using the technology and tools to measure these things. Those are going to overlap a lot. You're going to produce content that's going to sort of align to whatever you're trying to target and get visibility for. And then you're going to spend some time or money on program management, figuring out the strategy, doing coordination, pulling all the analytics at your work in your tools, other things like that. And a lot of that is going to overlap between the two. So I would generally suggest folding the two together. Cool. All right, let's switch over to a couple of other things. So I was really inspired to run this. Sorry, I'm just getting this open. I was really inspired to run this live stream from, and let me get the actual post up and y'all can see it, from Madhav Bhandari. He's the head of marketing at Storylane, and he did this great post here, which you can see writ very large, about how much they're spending and where exactly it breaks down. And this is super interesting just to, not everybody will share this. We have seen this data from other companies as well. It's generally sort of in the same ballpark, but you can see all the pieces here. So he's spending about a third of his budget, a little bit more on paid ads. He's spending about a seventh of his budget on conferences and events. And then a lot of the other things in here, and then customer marketing, a lot of these other things are kind of, okay, we're going to run a program around that and make an investment, put some chips down here, but that's not necessarily driving the acquisition strategy, or if it is, it's doing it at a very sort of efficient level. Paid ads, obviously, you're going to need to spend a lot more on because they're paid than organic, which is part of what makes organic so efficient. But what he's got budgeted here is $200K for SEO, and that kind of comes out of this 3.3 million number. And now let's look at a spreadsheet. I'm actually going to share a spreadsheet with you. We'll remove this, and then we will share this tab instead. And this, you're just going to see a blank spreadsheet. But this is, marketing budget is 3.3 million. And then SEO budget is 200,000. And then let's do the percentage here. And that's going to be that over that. And then we got to format that as a percent. So about 6%, 6.1% of the budget on SEO. Now, I think there are some other things in here where there's a content budget that's probably separate from this. I think was in that post. There are some other things that will be very helpful with SEO and with AEO, but that's definitely part of this. So that's that part. And actually, I don't see content as a separate bucket here. So that might be an additional piece of spending, but that's what he's got. And if I look over to Gartner, so that's kind of the opposite side of everything. And I just look at sort of, here's their 2025 CMO spend survey. Marketing budgets are about 8% of overall revenue. And then if you kind of keep going down the road here, there's more on digital as a percentage of marketing budgets. And then you can see about here, it's about 9%. So if I go back here, Madhav's actually underspending a little bit on this, but I would argue there might be some categories that he's not including here. Underspending, I mean, it's meaningless in this case, but like according to that average of much larger companies, that's number one. And then number two is that if you just compare it to that overall Gartner number, which is 9%, like that is a number that you could potentially use here, but a lot of those companies might be spending a little bit less. So there are lots of different percentages that you can look at here, but 6%, 9%, something like that, maybe a little bit more, maybe you're folding in other stuff. Okay. And so this is one way to kind of budget for this, is to take the percentage of your marketing budget you want to allocate here. And that's what we commonly see. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is how you might break this down into some individual pieces. So actually, I'll just show you one more study real quick, which is, this is Conductor from last year. And Conductor says digital marketing budget is, if you kind of take the average here, figure it's about 10%. 48% are in this bucket, 30. It's hard to break this out, but looks like about 10%. So we're getting kind of a similar, and this is digital marketing budget, which is not the entire marketing budget. Digital marketing budget is about 70% of the overall budget. So this again comes into something like, 7, 8, 9, 10%, somewhere in there of your marketing spend is being allocated toward this. Okay, great. So now I want to talk about like what actually goes into this. And there are a bunch of things that you can think about in terms of how to track this spend and where to invest it. So I think that you're going to want to do a pretty significant amount of your investment is going to need to be in some kind of content. And I don't know what the right number is, but I'm just going to write out my line item here, which is actual content. And there are a few different ways you can do this. You can invest in tools that do it, like AirOps or NADN or those things I mentioned. Or you can sort of have people write that content. My sense is that for content that is specifically geared to the SEO AEO program, a lot of that you're going to be able to produce, not all of it, but a decent amount of it with taste, you're going to be able to produce with more automated tool. So that's that part. But you also will definitely need the support of the rest of the team. And here's where the post that Madhav shared maybe leaves a little bit of the story out, because the other thing that you're going to want to think about is, what is our topic strategy, and is the whole team rowing together on that? And that doesn't show up in one of these budget items. It's not specifically allocated toward SEO potentially, but it is an important part of how you need to think about this. So this spreadsheet is going to get a little weird, but it's kind of like, okay, content is going to be this, and maybe we'll spend $5,000 a month on content. I don't know what the right number should be, but then there's kind of like, aligned content or, content marketing or something like that. And that's going to need to be part of this too, because you want everybody to be participating in this. So that way, something like that. And then from a tools perspective, you have so many options. And actually, I'll make this an annual number. And you can see that, like, even at a pretty modest investment, it's a significant percentage of your SEO budget, but you can do a lot. So you could say, oh, actually, I'm going to spend 10K a month here on that kind of budget if you wanted to. Cool. Okay. And then what else might we spend money on? The content, the labor is a big part of it. Sometimes people put web development in here. I would tend to count that as marketing infrastructure. So I don't know that I would necessarily include that here, but you should be thinking about that web program and what you're allocating there. Another thing I see people put here is backlinks. I would probably zero that out in most cases. I think you really want to be focused on the content side, because content is where you're going to get your distribution. And then the other piece is analytics. And you have, and we'll put content or content automation. And you have so many options here. So you can use tools from Google for free. You can use SEMrush. You can use Profound. You can get more and more enthusiastic about the way that you look at these analytics. You can start to get deeply into HubSpot. And there are certain KPIs that we would suggest looking at. So impressions, unbranded impressions, LLM visibility, unbranded impressions, unbranded clicks, connection to pipeline, all that stuff. But very little of this requires huge amounts of investment in additional analytics, partly because you're going to want to be able to execute on this stuff. And a lot of the data that you need is out there for relatively low cost. So I'll put a question mark next to this. But I think the thing that people really overlook is the program management part. And that's where you're going to have somebody who needs to be pulling and thinking about, what do these reports mean? What do we do next? How does it change the strategy, whatever it is? And for our clients, this is one of the hardest things to figure out, because they are spending the money on content, they're spending money on other things, but it just doesn't quite all row together because there's nobody who's kind of driving that conversation. So you'll notice I have a lot of question marks here, because there's a lot of things that you can move within and out of this percentage. But in general, very roughly, you want to think about that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% number, especially if you're growing And also, some of this budget will probably exist outside of your pure SEO line item because you want to connect it with the rest of your content strategy. Let me see if I had any other questions that I want to answer before I kind of wrap up. We talked about folding AEO and SEO into the same budget item. I would definitely do that. We talked about where you want to invest money. I would say most of that is going to be in content, some way of producing that, but also in program management and probably sort of thirdly in the tools and technology. I think that's important, but there's lots of ways to do that you're going to want to think about, and you want to make sure you can operationalize all those investments. And then the other thing I would say is like, how do you actually convey the value of these programs to your stakeholders? And coming back to the initial thing of, I hope you're not having a conversation right now where, senior leadership or the CEO is kind of getting really deeply into the specifics of how you've allocated your SEO budget, right? But I do think you can make a case, especially with AEO, SEO, and content, that these have positive benefits all over the place. So the KPIs that you're going to want to look at there are not just things like unbranded search, clicks and impressions, LLM visibility, conversions. All that stuff is really important, but you also want to look at how all of this participates in the overall content journey. Who does it bring to the site who maybe doesn't convert? Like, those are all things that you can kind of add here. And so if I go back to my spreadsheet and I hit present again here, and so I've got like all these question marks here. That's like a question mark, something there. And I said, spend most of your money here. And then for outcomes, you might want to think about unbranded click. Let's just do clicks from search, LLM visibility. You're going to want to think about influence on pipeline. And I'm putting results to track in here too. And I didn't share this again. LLM visibility, clicks from search, influence on pipeline, originated pipeline, like when did somebody find you through an LLM? There are other things here too, like non-converting visitors. If you connect this with your content system, your overall content system, you might be able to produce as part of this program answers to sales FAQs that are usable there. You might be able to look at linting your, let's just call this positioning, message distribution. Do people know who we are? So these are all things that you're going to want to think about as against these numbers over here. And you should be able to move these numbers. These are all pretty movable in the short and medium term, and it can help you make that case for, okay, we made this investment. Here are some of the results that we're seeing out of it, and are those worth it? Cool. Okay, I'm going to stop here. How should you budget for AEO and SEO? Gave you some numbers on how to talk about this, but I think more importantly is the conversation around all of the places that content in general and AEO and SEO specifically touch the funnel, improve outcomes, lower customer acquisition cost, help move deals along, do all of those things. And I also think that, you don't need to spend a lot of money on analytics as part of your stack, but spending some money on that, having a clear sense of what you want to measure is pretty important for understanding how it's performing in your overall system. And then the two main buckets that I would be using for most of these things are really mostly human oriented, which are content creation, and you might be able to do some of that automated, you might not be able to, and what I'm calling program management and strategy, which is how do we write about the right topics, who's pulling this reporting and helping us course correct, all those other questions, but those are the places to really invest there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.